Welcome to Understanding Conflict Management in the Workplace. This is an ILM module and is brought to you by Professional Futures. Welcome back to Understanding Conflict Management in the Workplace with me, Marie O'Donnell. Video 2. The Causes of Conflict. So let's look at the learning objectives for this session. By the end of the session, you will be able to define the term conflict within a business or organisational context. You'll list and examine the causes of workplace conflict, and you will describe the 8 common causes of conflict as described by Bell and Hart. We often hear the term conflict, but do we really understand what it means? Spend the next couple of moments trying to define the term conflict. What does it mean within an organisational context? Conflict can be defined as friction or opposition resulting from actual or perceived differences or incompatibilities. That conflict may have negative as well as positive characteristics. Or it could be defined as a state of mind in which a person experiences a clash of opposing feelings or needs. The source of these definitions is from the Concise Oxford English Dictionary. What we can note from these two quite different definitions are that from an individual, conflict can be both internal and external. When in the workplace, it's possible to see external conflict. As a manager, you might observe the signs, for example, disagreements and disputes between staff. However, there could also be people who are struggling because their perspectives may not necessarily align with those of the organisation. And that could also manifest itself in passive behaviours. For example, a colleague could deliberately ignore something that they know could cause a problem because they want to avoid getting into a conflict situation with you, their manager. Another point to note is that some people will do everything they can to avoid conflict. And this creates additional problems when they refuse to confront an issue. For example, if the manager wants to make some changes, but their staff disagree with the change, some staff might deliberately choose to ignore the change, and as a result, they might try to sabotage the whole process. And often when challenged, they'll plead ignorance or argue that they didn't understand what to do, or they just understood it differently. They might even argue that they weren't consulted with, or that they assume the change just didn't apply to them. They may even try to sabotage the change by trying to get others on their side and challenge the change altogether. That said, it's also worth noting that some conflict can be good, the caveat being that it is properly managed. For example, many creative organisations actively encourage a level of conflict because they believe that adversarial thinking does encourage innovation, and we will explore that more later on in this course. Let us consider what causes conflict. As we know, there are many causes of conflict in the workplace. Some are quite simple and are just a result of minor frustrations. However, other causes of conflict are more complex and relate to the ways that an organisation might do things. In other words, its culture. For example, it would be healthy to have staff competing with each other in a sales team in order to achieve high sales targets. But when the competition starts to create jealousy, for example, the conflict can begin to escalate. Colleagues might start to behave in a manner that's counterproductive, for example, deliberately stealing another colleague's sales leads and taking them for themselves. Over to you. Turn to page 5 in your workbook and complete the activity. If you aren't using the workbook, take 10 minutes to identify examples of workplace conflict. You probably produced a really long list for this exercise, so let's consider some of them. There are many examples here, starting with task distribution. Staff might feel that they're taking on more work than others and they're unhappy about this. Conflicting priorities can create problems, especially when deadlines are missed as a result. Some people's perception of standards might be higher or indeed lower than others, and that can create conflict. When people start to argue or shout at each other, or indeed become physical with abuse, this is a sure sign that something is wrong. Any actual or perceived favouritism can create real problems in the workplace, and as a result, you could get conflict between the different parties. Staff could feel very unhappy if their working conditions were perceived to be unfair, and they can try to encourage others to take up the cause with them and take sides. Now, if you turn up at work on time and never take time off work, you might start to feel unhappy with others and aggrieved that they are continually late, or in your opinion, taking advantage of the sickness policy, for example. Do you have a manager who takes the credit for themselves when things go well, but when things go wrong, do they blame you and their staff? Personality clashes where personal disagreements can lead to friction and conflict. And finally, office romances. Personal relationships can create problems. Other staff might even feel uncomfortable around the couple. And if the relationship breaks down, all sorts of problems can occur. Having identified examples of conflict, we can now consider what may have caused the conflict in the first place, as there are many causes, starting off with poor communication. If people don't know why they are doing something or what it is they need to do, they may start to make their own assumptions, and this is almost always negative. An autocratic leadership style can create conflict, as not everyone responds well to this style of leadership. They may start to feel frustrated at not being able to use their own initiative, or feel restricted in some way. Excluding people in decision making. If decisions are made which will impact others, this will often be construed in a negative way, with the perception that something is being hidden or that management don't trust those involved. Insufficient resources is another cause. If people or other resources are too low, that can create a strain on existing resources and tempers could flare up. Another cause is managers having office favourites. This is never good. It can create jealousy and is very divisive. A failure to provide up-to-date and accurate job descriptions. That can create resentment if staff feel that they're not being recognised for their efforts. And not understanding people's roles as well. Perhaps you have assumed that a member of your team should have completed a particular task and it hasn't been done. So you challenge them without thinking, and they get very upset or angry. And they're also going to be angry with you for not understanding their role. And that can also apply to colleagues, not understanding each other's roles, and it could result in arguments about who should do what. Constant change in the goalposts. This can be very unsettling, and people can become very defensive and challenge the leader if they feel that this is unnecessary. A perceived lack of appreciation for people's efforts. When staff work hard and don't receive any acknowledgement for their efforts, they can start to feel resentful. If as a manager you're unapproachable, staff might feel that they can't come to you. How will you find out then if there are problems that need your attention? Conflict can really escalate and you would know nothing about it until the damage has been done. Over to you. Turn to page 7 in your workbook and complete the activity. Or spend the next 30 minutes using your list and the information on the slides above to analyse at least 3 examples of conflict in order to determine what the actual root cause of each conflict was. Psychologists Art Bell and Bret Hart identified 8 common causes of conflict in the workplace, and they suggest that we can use these to identify what could be causing conflict and then take the right steps to avoid potential conflict or to help us choose the right strategy to resolve that conflict. Now, we will look at this model further when we look at ways of tackling conflict, but for now let's consider the 8 common causes in more detail. And we're going to start off with conflicting resources. Where resources scarce or not available, colleagues can end up competing with each other for that resource, and this can often end in dispute. Conflicting styles is another example of a cause of conflict. This is where we talk about personality clashes, and disagreements often arise because people like to work differently in the workplace. For example, some people love the thrill of working to a tight deadline and they like to leave the work to the last minute, whereas others really don't like this and they thrive on planning the work and they work methodically to meet a deadline. The different working styles have been termed as preferences, and this was by Carl Jung, and these can cause a lot of friction and conflict in the workplace. Conflicting perceptions is another common cause of conflict. There is a phrase known as perception is real to the person whose perception it is, and different perceptions about things are a frequent cause of conflict in the workplace. For example, employee A might think that employee B has done something in a certain way to get a certain result, but B believes that A is representing this falsely, and that's where the dispute is going to occur. Conflicting goals is another cause. Your organisation might see itself as an organisation that offers high quality products and services and sets goals accordingly. And then when a manager may say demand that staff work more quickly to increase output, this is where goals become conflicted, and it's also usually at the expense of quality. Conflicting pressures are very similar to conflicting goals, and these usually arise when you're waiting on someone to do something for you, but you can't complete your work until you've received this work from them. And this is critical to you as a high priority, but to them it isn't a high priority, and that is where the conflict can occur. And conflicting roles as well. Maybe we've seen someone pick up a task that we think we should be doing, or perhaps we're doing something that we think shouldn't be us and it should be someone else. Turf wars and office politics are often evident when people are in conflict over the roles as well. And different personal values is another major cause of conflict. How do we deal with a request from a colleague or manager to do something with which goes against our values? It might compromise them in some way, or indeed our personal beliefs. And finally, unpredictable policies. Workplace conflict can often occur where there is a lack of clarity about policies. People are often very confused and misunderstandings occur, and often conflict occurs as a result. So to summarise this session, there are many causes of conflict, and being aware of the stages of conflict should help the manager to spot when it is starting and to deal with it effectively before it gets out of hand. So having completed this session, you have now met the following learning objectives. You can define the term conflict within a business or organisational context. You have listed and examined the causes of workplace conflict, and you can now describe the 8 common causes of conflict as described by Bell and Hart. So that's it for this session. Join me in video 3, where we will start to explore the stages of conflict. Visit our website, where you can access the full course on understanding conflict management in the workplace. This includes a really useful assignment guide with lots of top tips to help you pass your assignment. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so that you never miss a new unit. And finally, enjoy watching your next video.